Hello everyone, I'm Ryujin Rising, and RWBY gets it done again. Here's my Afterthoughts chapter review of RWBY Volume 8, Chapter 12, Creation. Now, my chapter reviews are not episode breakdowns. Instead, what I do is share 5 takeaways that I can really speak to from any given chapter. And this isn't a top 5, but more of a main 5. And before I get any further, a small update, I will be doing both reaction videos and chapter reviews from here on out for Volume 8. And that did, I guess you could say, that started with Chapter 11 last week. So for the last 4 chapters of the volume, I've got both reactions and chapter reviews coming. I hope you look forward to them. But back to it, here we go, my 5 takeaways from RWBY Volume 8, Chapter 12. And remember, spoilers. My first takeaway is that I'm freaking stupid. Like, I'm sorry for wasting your time, apparently. Because, alright, so RWBY as a show, especially for Volume 8, is subverting so many expectations. It's doing so great, it's being so great that, like, the way that I consume the show has gotta be so, like, underwhelming for you. Like, is it good for you? No, probably not, right? Like, that's just what I'm thinking, at least. Like, who's sitting here watching, coming to me for the hot theories for the next chapter? Absolutely nobody. Because this show keeps going above and beyond what I'm thinking it's going to be. And I don't know if that's just because, like, I'm so jaded when it comes to RWBY. I don't think that's really the right word. But you come to expect so much after the show is kind of the same way for a long time. Where you start to see some patterns developing. And Volume 8 is absolutely just its own freaking thing. So I'm sorry that my content sucks because I don't really think that far ahead. You know, I'm the kind of, like, there's a, you know, in the fandom, there's a good number of different, I don't know if, I don't want to, like, put RWBY tubers in boxes, right? I'm not trying to do that. But we all, like, there's so many different strengths that different people succeed in. Like, you got some wild and out, like, oddball theories. You got people who really like to break down chapters, like, in terms of, like, every little darn thing. You know, or they're MacGyvering the hottest freaking theories out of concept art and audio cues and, like thinking 5 chapters ahead, like 5 different important plot points ahead to get to the plot point that their theory is involved in. And here I am not knowing what's going to happen in the next freaking chapter. Like, who's coming to me, right? Anyway, but yeah, like, so again, with subverting expectations, that this chapter, it's called Creation, and you'll see in my reaction, I go into it, I start that reaction like, huh, creation. Why would it be, what's it doing being called that? I don't think they're gonna use the relic this chapter, but I think it'll play a role. And well, yeah. So yeah. That's, you know, I just don't theorize. So this chapter actually has provided, at least for me, you know, the kind of guy who thinks 1 step ahead and not like 5, that the theory, you know, I legitimately, at least I came to my own conclusions on a theory before really seeing that much of what different people thought about this chapter online. So that's my next takeaway. You know, my next takeaway is going to be, you know, where I stand on one of the rather prevailing theories, and keeping in mind, I wrote all of this before I really even, like, looked online and saw, oh, it's not, like, I'm not special. My second takeaway is the vacuole arc is not next for the show. I am firmly in the camp that some amount of falling to a magical place will be in order very soon, and the much speculated upon Volume 9 will be the hero's journeying to make it back to Remnant.
We need to funnel everybody through a central location first.
Here, a place like these vaults.
You kids are either smarter or much more foolish than you realize. Do not fall.
I recognize that. The girl who fell through the world?
I was recently reminded of an old fairy tale. A young girl flees to a magical place.
How do you think legends and fairy tales get started? Even the craziest ones come from somewhere.
So those things we've been calling pocket dimensions, the show never calls them that. They're not pocket dimensions. They're not pockets, at least. They might be in this form, but there's more going on here. You know, Joseph Joestar here knows more than the heroes do. In saying they don't realize they're foolish, he knows something they don't, and he also knows why they should not fall. He gave them exactly what they asked for. They asked for the tubes from Chapter 2. They didn't ask for a ground floor, so that's what they're working with. Or, I guess, without. So whether the bottom of that pit has to do with a different pocket dimension or a different bend in space-time than we have the ability to perceive right now, who knows? The show has gotten a lot more magical over time. We have and we know about the lamp, the staff, the other two, limited forms of magic, dimensions of a plane other than Remnant, two people from magical pre-Remnant times, a rather curious remanifestation of life with auras, semblances, and faunus traits after the Big Yeetus, and we have who knows how much more RWBY to go. Sooner or later, it's gonna get very magical. The Girl Who Fell Through the World is a play on Alice in Wonderland, and it might just be the cleverest way RWBY could foreshadow a fall into the void. Even the craziest fairy tales come from somewhere, so we have to be ready for the grain of truth that's in this one. You do have to consider both scenes from Oz to understand that that fairy tale is about a girl falling to a magical place, but it's true. It holds. And evidence for Volume 9 being a magical detour extends beyond RWBY proper. Carrie Shawcross and Lindsay Jones did an interview with Comic Book Resources, or CBR, at the beginning of Volume 8, where, quite curiously, they talked a good chunk about the end of Volume 8. There's a link to it in the description, but, well, look. The interviewer asks if Vacuo is next or not, and Carrie tries to come off as I won't spoil anything, but he says there might be a detour on the way. Then the interview continues to where Carrie says he's excited for people to see Volume 8's end, for how far Team RWBY has come and how far the story has grown. And the lens that I've watched RWBY grow from is, again, the show getting more and more magical over time. It's always going higher and higher fantasy. The bombshell episodes we get are lore drop episodes. There's this trajectory of magical revelation after magical revelation, so Volume 8 could really end in a way that embraces all of these lore drops and shows the heroes exactly what in-universe means got them to that other dimension. Wherever they're headed, the heroes are going to reenact the girl who fell through the world. I should say, though, that beyond the evidence, I also just personally really want to see Volume 9 as a sort of break from the main plot type thing. Whatever is in that void space below their portal system, I want it to provide Volume 8 with a twist ending that completely changes the entire goal of Volume 9. I want, basically, a cliffhanger to end all cliffhangers, but that's not necessarily meaning that it has to be one that, hanging on the plot that we're thinking about, or even that we have much of a concept of knowing what is at its edge. I made a video way back when about my 7 hopes for Volume 7, before Volume 7 aired, and the last hope was that I wanted the volume to give us a sense of what Volume 8 would be, only to introduce something at the last minute that would completely change the next volume's entire goal. And you could say that happened. You could say that. But back then, I thought Volume 7 could potentially be the entire Atlas arc. And what I meant was more of that I wanted the show to put the main conflict somewhat honestly on hold by adding a sudden, different, wild and out there short-term goal that needs to be met before they can get back to the main conflict. A journey back to Remnant would be exactly that. This is not to say that the heroes can't still advance the main plot in some ways while they're out there, just maybe not in the ways that they would want to. And depending on if or not all of the heroes fall, Volume 9 could follow 2 arcs so that the main plot can still advance, while some heroes just have to fight their way back to it, while, still learning some important stuff along the way. And I do realize, believe me I do, that I am asking for what some people would call unnecessary, or at the worst, filler, which is entirely incorrect, but people would still say it. But it's all about how it plays out, and I legitimately see a lot of this happening. We already know that Ozpin is the one who set up the different portal dimensions to house the relics, so we know that he understands at least somewhat of what is going on here with them. Maybe he might not know if or what is about the bottomless void. I mean, obviously you can probably at least assume that death is down there, but guess what? Death would mean, well, we do know that there is an afterlife. As much as I always thought that the Volume 6 Chapter 3 mention of the afterlife during the Lost Fable, I always kind of thought that was a throwaway line, but I mean, if death is down there, then we might have something really cool for the heroes to fight their way back out of. I honestly wouldn't want to see Pyrrha or Torchwick or Hazel or literally anybody who's died, and that might kind of happen if there were an afterlife arc, but you know what? I still want to see this happen. And the opening theme says it. They're going to risk the fall. The fall of Atlas, sure. Literally, we've already gotten there. It's already falling. We're already seeing that. But wherever falling into this void leads, I believe Volume 9 will teach us more about the remnants the heroes thought they knew, that they will never get back to, if they ever truly can. My third takeaway, the show is getting to be a higher fantasy than we even have a chance to realize, and I've been waiting for this for so long, and all signs in this chapter, to me, point to that finally happening. And it could just be confirmation bias. It could be. But, at the end of my reaction video to this chapter that, again, you can look forward to watching as soon as Chapter 12 is made public, I was just at a loss for words. Legitimately, Chapter 12 checked off so many boxes for me, but the biggest one is that the writing is finally willing to play in the space of the world that it's created on a much deeper level. Volume 8 in general has really managed to do that, to use this wide variety of characters and locations to their fullest. I thought we were done seeing the tundra at the end of Volume 7 with Crow and Clover and Robin and Tyrion, and I thought that was going to be really all we had to deal with the tundra, and yet here we are with such a beautiful and well choreographed scene. So Volume 8 really does manage to use this wide variety of tools at its disposal, but I'm specifically talking about how much I love that they're using magic. The show is finally willing to wave that magic wand, and as I was talking about the plunge into Volume 9, Ambrosius telling Team RWBY that they're more foolish than they realize, that tells me there's probably even more magical of a world out there that they cannot prepare for. My fourth takeaway is that Penny's newfound human body offers so much for her character, especially given the fact that it still means something because she's always been a human girl, yes, trapped in a robot body, so it doesn't necessarily, from that one angle alone, have to mean that, well, getting a human body doesn't really mean much because she's already human inside, like, that, but that's not the point. The point is her autonomy. And for that reason, Penny getting a human body is also incredibly symbolic. So let me walk you through that symbolism with a character analysis that speaks of her in terms of all three bodies she's had. And one that, now that I look at the script, is probably a little bit more difficult to understand than what RWBY told Ambrosius, but bear with me. Penny's character has always been defined as robotic yet fundamentally human. Her robot body symbolically represents what other people want of her, and her human soul symbolically represents her own wants. In other words, her robot body is her obligations, and her human soul is her desires. The Beacon Arc's Penny 1.0 lived as a robot completely under Ironwood's eye at the beginning. It's important to mention that Pietro is responsible for building her, and her soul is from his soul, and as her father, her wants are his wants. But Pietro built her for Ironwood, so it's Ironwood's obligations upon Penny that matter here. Penny saw herself as a robot first and foremost, who happened to have the ability to generate an aura. RWBY told her that her human soul matters more for Penny's identity than the body that it's controlling. Penny's soul makes her a real girl. Penny's time with RWBY in those days allowed her to see the world beyond Ironwood's obligations, and ultimately, she wanted to choose a life where she could stay at Beacon with her new friends, as she says in Volume 3. But Penny was built to protect the world, and Ironwood needed that of her, and the discovery of Penny's robot body is what led to her destruction. The orchestration of Penny's death involved her robot body. But it was only Penny's first death. Penny 2.0's Volume 7 and 8 character arc is even more about the interplay between her robot and human sides. She begins the volume with the title of Protector of Mantle, which Ironwood gave her. She is living out Ironwood's wants of her, but it's important to know that she also chose that path. And by the way, can you see the parallels to Winter's character here? Penny calls out her needs and wants, her obligations versus her desires, to RWBY in Volume 7, Chapter 5. And ultimately, with the end of the volume, especially given the interplay with Winter that she has, where the two of them are two sides of the same coin, so to speak, she chooses the path of her desires instead of defaulting to Ironwood, defaulting to her obligations at the volume's end with the death of Freya. Penny's maiden powers are a testament to her humanity, and throughout Volume 8, she continues to walk that path of her wants. But she struggles because her robot side that represents what others want of her is now holding her back. Watts' virus wouldn't mean anything if Penny never had a robot body. And because Ironwood ordered Watts to do it, Ironwood is now also physically responsible for holding Penny's humanity back. Eventually, Penny's robot body becomes unsustainable for her soul. Ironwood's wants can no longer physically coexist with Penny's. Penny 2.0 literally dies on screen with the birth of Penny 3.0, which in all honesty is an unfair name given that her body is human now, even when she was always human inside. Pietro always believed in this Penny, the Penny who could live her life by her wants, the wants that were supposed to line up with Ironwood's, and did for most of her life. But especially when you consider Penny 1.0 wanting to stay at Beacon, Penny 3.0, the human who gets to live the life she wants, is, as Blake puts it, the girl who's always been there underneath. Penny's desires were always buried under her obligations, just as her soul was always under those nuts and bolts. And altogether, that means that Penny's humanity, her soul, is her truest essence both in the show's universe and as a character with motivations on screen. For my fifth takeaway, as always, I look forward to a hope or a prediction I have for the future of RWBY, which might either come for next week or just way out there, and I predict how it might happen. Before that, though, I check in with my previous hopes and predictions with this graphic. I've already really talked about high fantasy, and part of me really wants that Emerald and Neo fight, but only for as long as it takes for Neo to defect. And Ozpin could really, again, take the lead given that he knows more about the pocket dimensions than anybody else. He steals the relics away from them, so, he could take the lead or even be the key in fighting to get back from that high fantasy fall. And we can throw away the 4 and 8 idea from Chapter 5 at this point. That one's useless. Anybody remember Crimson? Why'd they give him a voice? So what I am looking forward to this time My fifth takeaway for Volume 8, Chapter 12 is that I'm looking forward to all of it. Man, just give me all of it. Just, come on, just feed it right into my... Alright, but... As for something concrete, just give me whatever bonkers fight scene is bound to take place in that pocket portal world. Come on. We know it has to happen. Look at it. Look at this thing. You can't not have a fight in there, especially since there's still conflict to come and defaults to be had. It has to all be in there. There's 2 chapters to go. And given that I'm expecting Volume 8 to end in the magical detour, I think the next chapter will do, most of the work setting up the constraints of the final battle, while the Chapter 14 finale will be the majority of the fight scene as well as the fall. But who knows, I'll tell you this much, I want to. And those are my 5 takeaways from RWBY Volume 8, Chapter 12, Creation. Everything else is just an afterthought. I'm doing chapter reviews and now reaction videos once a week on my channel for the rest of Volume 8, so subscribe and stick around for those. What are your thoughts on Volume 8, Chapter 12, and what do you predict for the future? How soon do you think we will properly be in Vacuo? Next chapter? Volume 9? Volume 10? Let me know down below. And while you're around, like and subscribe. I'll see you next time. I'm Raijin Rising. Have a good one. What are you still doing here? The video is over. I gave you so many links.